So welcome everyone today to our webinar on teaching conversation strategies. Conversation skills are one of the most important things that we teach to our English students because we want them to be able to have real conversations with others. And so we're going to learn today about 4 different strategies you can use with your students that will help them to participate more fully in conversations. I want to start out with this verse from Ephesians 4:29 in the easy to read version. When you talk, don't say anything bad, but say the good things that people need, whatever will help them grow stronger. Then what you say will be a blessing to those who hear you. And so we can see in this verse that our words have the power to be a blessing, to help people, to grow stronger, to give them the good things they need, like the good news of the gospel. And also a warning that we should not use our tongues and our conversation skills for bad things, for gossiping, for saying bad things about people, for lying, for anything that is not pleasing to the Lord, but that we should be filled with good things to say. And so as we model conversations for our students, we want to be clear that we are given words to lift people up, to help them grow stronger and to bless them. All right. So I have found that many times in my English classes, conversations can feel like we are pulling teeth. So this is an idiom we use in North American English. And when we say it's like pulling teeth, we mean it's very hard to do. It's very unpleasant. It's hard for the dentist to pull a tooth out, and it's very hard for the patient who's losing a tooth. But sometimes our students are reluctant to engage in conversations. And so as teachers, we often ask them questions, but the students may reply with just 1 or 2 word answers and not add anything more. And so it's hard to have an authentic conversation with them. So one example, this is a sort of conversation I often have with my beginning level students. I will say, "How are you?" And they will reply, "Fine." "What did you do this weekend?" "It worked." "How do you like your job?" "It's okay." And so in these conversations, I have to keep trying to come up with more and more and more questions, but I'm not getting a lot back out of them. And there's a number of reasons for this. And so we're going to look on how we can improve this. So for students to be able to engage in good conversations, there's a few things that they need. The first is they need a safe, relaxed, and comfortable environment. So they have to feel that it is safe to have a conversation. They have to feel that the people that they are talking to care about them and are not going to hurt them or make fun of them or use what they say against them. They have to be relaxed. If they're nervous, although some people when they're nervous talk a lot, I've found for English learners, when they're nervous, they tend to be very quiet. And so we want to make sure that they know that our classroom is a place where they are safe to talk, where what they have to say is confidential, where we are not going to laugh at them or belittle them if they make mistakes, but that we care about them and we love them. And so this is important not only for us as teachers, but if there are other students in the class, they have to know those rules, right? That they are not allowed to laugh at someone when they make a mistake, that they should not be interrupting the other students and correcting them during the time of conversation, and that things that are said in the classroom, such as prayer requests, will not be shared outside without the student's permission. So those are just some of the safe boundaries that have to occur for students to feel comfortable to talk. The second thing is students need to have enough vocabulary and grammar to speak about the topic that we're conversing on. And we often expect too much of our beginning level students. It's hard to have a conversation when you only know 200 or 300 words in a language. There's not a lot you can say yet. So we want to, before we have a conversation, make sure that we have taught the vocabulary and grammar and modeled that for them so that they have an idea of the words that they need to use and how to use them. So for example, I teach or I speak Spanish at about a B2 level, which is like a high intermediate level. And so I'm really good about having conversations about food and color and clothing. I can say things like in Spanish, like the sky is blue today, the sun is out, the weather is warm. But if you ask me, what do you think about the political situation in the Middle East? Or what do you think the impact of artificial intelligence will be on educational institutions? I would not be able to answer those questions with my level of Spanish very well because I don't have the complex vocabulary needed to talk about those things. So we want to have reasonable expectations for the levels that they're at. A third thing we need to teach our students are some of these conversation skills. So we're going to be learning today about 4 conversation skills, 2 R's and 2 A's. I was going to make an acronym like RA or RR or RAR out of it, but it wasn't that impressive. So I would just remember there's 2 R's and 2 A's. So we're going to be learning about reacting, restating, adding to ideas, and asking follow-up questions. So those are 4 strategies that will help your students build up good conversations. And then the final thing that students need to engage in good conversations is practice. It takes a lot of practice. They're not going to be able to do it right away. And so I'll show you a few practice activities we can do. Okay, so what we want to do instead of pulling teeth in conversations, we want it to be more like a volley where a ball is going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, not in a competitive way, but just to try to keep the ball up in the air. So I'm a really terrible tennis player. And when I play with my sister, who's a really good tennis player, our goal is not to have a game where one of us wins and one loses, because I will lose all the time. But our goal is just to keep the ball going, see how many times we can hit it back and forth without losing it and having to go chase it. So that's a little bit what it's like with conversation. So I say something and then you say something back, and then I say something and you say something back. And we keep going back and forth like that. So here's the same conversation I showed you before, the pulling tooth conversation, but it's adding some of those conversational strategies or conversational moves that I mentioned. So the first person, A, asks, how are you? And B says, fine, but then adds to that idea. So instead of just stopping with fine, we ask them to add something more. Fine, I'm a little tired from this weekend. And then A is going to restate what they said. That's one of the things. So reacting, sorry to hear that, and restating that you're tired, and then asking a follow-up question. What did you do this weekend? I worked from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. on Saturday at the store. So again, instead of just saying I worked, we're adding on a little more information to that. I worked from 8 to 8 on Saturday at the store. Then the first person can react to that and say, that's a long day. So we're expressing understanding and sympathy. And ask a follow-up question. How do you like your job? It's okay. And then they add to it. I really like the people, but the hours are bad. How is your job? So they add a follow-up question to that. So those are just a little demonstration of how we can add those little things in and teach our students to do that to make their conversations more productive. Okay, so the 4 conversation skills or strategies or moves we're going to be looking at are react, restate, add on to an idea, and ask follow-up questions. Now, you don't have to teach your students to do all of these things at once. You can just teach these one skill at a time. And as they master that, you can add on others. But I'll give you an example of how this works. So let's say we've asked someone about their family, and they say, I have 10 brothers and sisters. So first of all, one of the things we can do is react to that. We can say, wow, or that's great, or nice. The second thing that we might do is to restate it. And we do this for clarification to make sure we've heard them correctly, and just to confirm to them that we are listening and paying attention. You have a big family. We can add on to what they've said. So I might want to add something about me personally. I only have one sister, or I could add something onto their idea. Like it must be great to have such a big family. And then I can ask a follow-up question. Are you the oldest? Or how many brothers and how many sisters? But a natural follow-up question that keeps the conversation going. All right. Now, one of the things that often we're not even aware of doing, but is really essential in conversation is reacting. In linguistics, we call this back channeling. And so these are signals that listeners use to show that they're paying attention, but they don't have the intention of taking over the conversation. It's just to let them know, I hear you, I'm listening, I'm interested in what you have to say. And some of these are written in the little speech bubbles up here. So some things we might say as a friend is talking, we'd say, cool, that's interesting. Right, really? Oh no, Ah, go on. So those are just, they're little verbal cues to the other person that we're paying attention. The other day, I was talking to a friend on the phone, and I was trying to do something else simultaneously, which is always a bad idea. Multitasking is not good for me. So my friend was telling me something, and I was busy trying to fix something and like struggling with it. And all of a sudden she said, "Are you still there?" And I said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, I'm here, I'm here." And she's like, "Oh, I didn't hear anything from you." And so she realized from my silence, because I was focused on something else instead of providing reactions, that I was not paying attention to her, right? Um, so we, in in conversations, we expect, now this is a cultural thing for North American English speakers. We expect that the other person will be saying these little reactions as well as using nonverbal cues. So if we're on the phone, it's not as important, but if we're in person, people often use reactions that are nonverbal. We nod. Oops. We nod while the person is talking. We usually look at them, we make eye contact with them or look at their general direction. And we use facial expressions. We smile if they're saying something happy. We frown if they're saying something sad. We, look perplexed if we don't understand what they're saying. But all of those show that we're engaged and we're listening. So we need to do those as well. Some other examples of verbal reactions could be, uh-huh, yeah, you did? Really? That's amazing. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Wow. Praise the Lord. That's great. That's too bad. Amen. Nice. Okay. So again, these are just little phrases, but the absence of these makes the other person uncomfortable. And so for our beginner students, sometimes even if they're listening and they can understand what someone is saying, they are not providing these back channel words in English. And so the other person is not sure that they understand or they're following or paying attention at all. Also, there are cross-cultural differences. So one thing I had was I taught a class with a bunch of Japanese businessmen. And when I would talk to them, they did not look at me and make eye contact. They looked down at the floor while I was talking to them. And that made me feel really uncomfortable. I felt like they didn't understand me or they weren't interested in what I had to say. But really, it was in their culture that they showed respect by looking down and not looking directly in the eyes of someone in authority while they were talking. So they were showing respect in their culture. But because that was different in my culture, I misunderstood it. Another thing that can be different is in some cultures, the type of back channel reaction that's used, the frequency and the position of it. Do you say it while the person is still talking, or do you say it when they've paused? That can vary a lot from culture to culture. And so that can cause negative reactions in cross-cultural communication. So you may want to make your students aware of that. So any questions on these little reacting or back channels? So I'm going to tell you guys a phrase that I said to my neighbor yesterday. And I'm going to ask you what type of reaction What type of reaction word would you give me as I say this sentence? So this is just a typical, not terribly interesting, everyday example of a sentence. I said, I'm growing tomatoes in my garden this year. So Tang and Tanya and Therese, what might be a response to that? Just one or two little reaction back channel words to show you're listening.
Wonderful.
Wonderful. Yes. Wonderful. Thank you. What else?
Amazing.
Amazing. So wonderful. Amazing. Therese, how about you? What would you say?
Have you grown to have you grown tomatoes before?
Okay, so that's a great follow-up question. But that is a terrific response. So that's something else we're going to be learning about is the follow-up questions. So that would be completely appropriate. Yeah, wonderful, amazing. Or if you wanted to ask a follow-up question, have you grown tomatoes before? Okay, great. Nice job. Let me go on to the next one. So now on, oops, gotta go back to my mouse. Another thing that's really important for language learners to do is to restate what the person has said, to summarize what they're saying, and also to clarify to make sure you understand. So again, if we use the example, if somebody says, I have 10 brothers and sisters, you could restate this to keep the conversation going. So you could say, you have 10 brothers and sisters? You could say it with slightly different words. You could say, you have 10 siblings? You have 11 kids total in your family? It sounds like you have a big family. You can also, ask it as a question. Did you say 10 brothers and 10 sisters, or 10 brothers and sisters total? Right? So you want to clarify. And again, especially if you don't know the language well, many times you misunderstand people. And by restating, you give them the chance to correct you and clarify what they have said. The second example, someone says, I worked from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. at the store. So you could restate it. You worked a long time. You worked 12 hours. You worked all day at the store. You worked from 8 in the morning to 8 at night. Or you shopped from 8 to 8. And then they could say, no, I didn't shop from 8 to 8. I worked from 8 to 8. Okay, so this is going to help us. If we have misunderstood, it gives them a chance to correct us. And if we have understood correctly, it validates what they've said, and it shows we're interested. Okay, so let's try this one again. So I'm growing tomatoes in my garden this year. How could you restate that to clarify and summarize? Tanya?
To clarify, I would say, so wait, so you're growing tomatoes in your backyard?
Good, yeah. So you're,
location.
oops, can't find my apostrophe. So you're growing tomatoes in your backyard.
Mhm.
And I might say, yes, in my backyard. Or I might say, no, in my front yard. Or no, in the community garden down the street. Good. How about one more? What's another thing we could say to clarify and summarize?
Are you growing other things in your garden as well?
Okay, good, good. And that's a good follow-up question. Are you growing other things in your garden as well? So it shows you're paying attention and showing interest and understanding what we're saying. Okay, great. Thanks, Therese. And let's go on. I forget when I use my annotation, I need to go back into my mouse before I can go on to the next slide. All right. Then a third thing we can do is add on to the ideas. You can add on details to your own ideas, and you can also add on to the ideas of others. This makes it more interesting, and you can show agreement, interest, encouragement, commonalities, or differences. So for example, if someone says, I have 10 brothers and sisters, I could say, so do I. Or I don't have any brothers, but I have 2 sisters. It's great to have a large family. That must have been fun growing up with so many kids to play with. So you're just commenting on their idea to show agreement, interest, encouragement, commonalities, or differences. If someone says, I work from 8 to 8 at the store, I could say, oh, your feet must be tired from standing that long. Or I only worked 7 hours. Or you are a hard worker. Or, that's great. I would prefer to work 3 12-hour shifts instead of working 5 days a week. So you're taking what they've said and you're adding on to that idea. All right, I'm going to make you guys do the tomato example again. So I'm growing tomatoes in my garden this year. What is something you could add to that?
So am I.
So
What
am
kind do you
I.
have?
Good. Yes, so am I. You're adding to the idea. You're showing a commonality. Yeah, and you can then ask a follow-up question. What kind are you growing? Good. Any other ideas? Tom?
I wish I could grow tomatoes.
Okay. I wish I could grow tomatoes also. Good, 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 good. Yeah, so you're adding something about yourself that's related to the topic and you're showing interest. Good, beautiful. Okay, now asking a follow-up question. So asking a follow-up question shows that you're interested in what they said and you want to learn more. So if they say, I have 10 brothers and sisters, you could ask, how many are boys and how many are girls? Do they all live in the same city? Do you see them very often? What are their names? There's a lot of follow-up questions you could ask. Or I worked from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. at the store. Is that your usual schedule? Which store do you work at? What do you do there? Okay, so just some natural questions that you would like to know about and shows that they're interested and you're taking some initiative to keep that ball moving instead of just nodding or not saying anything. Okay. So here's another example of a conversation with reacting and asking follow-up questions. So someone says, my son was very sick last week. It would be appropriate to say, oh no, or I'm so sorry, that's too bad. And then ask a follow-up question. How is he now? He's much better today. And then again, responding to show that you understand that good news. That's good. I'm glad. Praise the Lord. And then ask a follow-up question. Did he go to see a doctor? Or what was wrong with him? So those kind of things, it's very simple just to do those two things, just to make an appropriate reaction and ask a follow-up question. So here, if we model this for students, we're asking them to do, those two things. Just do an appropriate reaction, ask a follow-up. React, follow-up. So we could try to have them use those two skills. If that's too much for them, we can just start out with react. My son was very sick last week. Oh no, he's much better today. That's good. So we can teach our students to react to positive, negative, and neutral news. Maybe have them learn those phrases. Oh no, that's good. And for neutral, or fine, or okay. All right, and I think we already did some follow-up questions about the tomatoes. So what kind are you growing? And are you growing them in your backyard? So those are just natural questions that follow up to what the person has said.
Mhm.
Now, here's one way we could have our students practice. Instead of Q&A, those are question and answer. Those are the kind of pulling teeth conversations that we often have. We're going to ask the student to, instead of just answer the question, to answer, add on to the idea, and ask a follow-up question. So we can tell our students ahead of time, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to answer the question, add something onto the idea, and then ask me a follow-up question. So we're having them incorporate the add and ask in that way. So if I ask my student, where do you live? They answer, I live in Chicago. And then they add on something of interest. We moved here last year and it's a beautiful city. And then they ask a question to the first person, where do you live? Okay, and that person will do the same thing. And so that's a way to get them started with practicing, showing them a model, showing them what's expected of them, and then helping them to do that. Now, if you have a class, you can, so we have many different circumstances. Some of us are teaching with just one student, in which case the teacher is always the conversation partner. But if you have a class and you can put students in pairs, you could give them this activity to try to keep the conversation going for 2 minutes using that model of answer, add, and ask. So you can put the learners in pairs so they're sitting or standing together and facing each other, and then give partner A a question to ask. So you can write that down on a card if you're in a physical classroom. You can put them in breakout rooms if you're on Zoom. Give one a question to ask. For example, partner A will say, what's your favorite food? And then partner B would answer, I like pasta. Then partner B also has to add, they can't just say pasta, they have to add on to it. I eat pasta every Saturday. And then finally, partner B is going to ask a related question. Do you ever cook pasta? Okay, now the ball is in partner A's court and they have to do the same thing. They might say, yes, I often cook pasta. I like to make ramen noodles. What kind of sauce do you like to put on your pasta? Right? So they answer it, they add something, and they're asking a question. Now, when we're choosing questions for conversations, we want to make sure the questions are pretty concise and short, that they are easy to understand, that they're open-ended questions, not yes/no questions. So if it's just a yes/no question, if you say, for example, do you speak French? They might say no. And that's the end of the conversation. But if you ask them an open-ended question, which is a lot of times the W questions, why are you studying English, or where do you live, or what do you think about? They have to give more than a yes/no answer. We also want to make sure that the questions are accessible to everybody in the class, and that they are not too personal at first. So what I mean by accessible is something that anyone in the class could answer. For example, if you're asking about, tell me about your family. Well, there may be some people who don't have a family that's living, and they would feel excluded or uncomfortable with that. So sometimes instead of those personal topics, until you get to know your students better and know a little bit more about their situations, you might have general things that are accessible to all. So talk about the weather, talk about a picture like we do with the theme picture, talk about the Bible story we just read, something that everyone can add to and contribute to. Because if you're talking about jobs and some people in the class do not have a job, they may not have a lot to say about that. We can also use, as I said, prompts. So you could show a video clip to your students and have them talk about that, or the Bible story, or a picture. Let me give you an example of a picture we're using in one of our Light of the World lessons. So we just read the story of Elizabeth and Zechariah, and being told by the angel that they will give birth to a son named John, and Mary being told by the angel that she will be giving birth to Jesus. And so Mary runs to visit Elizabeth, and this painting shows that scene where Mary and Elizabeth are together, and the baby in Elizabeth's womb is jumping for joy. So we've just read this story, so we can look at this picture and say, what do you see in this picture? Who do you see? Who are these people? Describe them. And they might identify, well, this is Mary, this is Elizabeth, over here is a dove, over here's a man holding up a sign and it says his name is John. So I bet that's Zechariah, because he couldn't speak, but he held up a sign that said his name is John. And maybe that's Joseph, he looks like a carpenter. So just different things like that. I find that interesting pictures can really get people to talk. You can also ask your students to share their own pictures. One of the wonderful activities that I've done with my students is I ask them to take photos of 3 things that are important to them. And then they come to class and they have to tell the class about those 3 photos. So often people take pictures of their family or their car or the place where they work or, you know, their hobbies. But they often get very excited talking about those things because it is important to them. Okay. So here's, instead of working in pairs, we can also do conversations in groups. So this is an example. I got this from Literacy Minnesota. They have a great website and a lot of resources there if you ever want to check them out. This is an exercise you can do with pairs or 4 people. So you can put 4 people together and have each one have a role to play in keeping the conversation going. So like number 1, there, and you might give this to the lowest level student who can't speak as well. You could just have them ask a question from the list. So you've got a list of conversation questions. They'll just ask that question. And then number 2 has to answer it and add a comment, add on to the idea. And then number 3 has to react, wow, and then restate what they've heard. And then number 4 has to ask a follow-up question. So by giving them those different roles, and then you can rotate and have them do other roles, that gives them a chance to practice these things in a group. And so in a group is a lot harder than one-on-one, but then it's important for them also to get up those skills to know how to manage conversations in a group of people as you would in a social situation. All right, so let me just show you some of the resources that we have here. One of our resources is called the Talk Time Conversation Questions. So these are more appropriate for low, intermediate, and higher students, but you can see we've got a list of like 42 topics. And then for each one, there's a picture, there's a series of questions. When do you give advice? Give an example of someone who benefited from your advice, etc. It gives some Bible verses related to the theme, and it also gives some links to videos and other things. So there's a lot of interesting topics in there you can use. There's also picture prompts, so Christian art. The one I showed you is from BC Cart Farm. So the artist's name is James Janknet, and he's great. He has some wonderful paintings with a lot to discuss. The Art and Theology has artists listed by country. So that's kind of interesting because you can find, you know, if your student is Ukrainian or Thai, you can find art that may be found in their culture that they may want to discuss. And, photo banks. So here they've got a list on the Literacy Minnesota website of some great places to find photographs. A lot of these are news photos. The New York Times has a photo of the week called "What's Going On in This Picture?" And so those are great for conversation topics too. So I hope that this webinar has been helpful for you guys, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one.